Hi there, welcome to DIY Comics FAQ. I am GE Gallas and I'm here to answer all your questions about indie comics, graphic novels, webcomics, zines, self-publishing, storytelling, you name it. If you like my videos, don't forget to subscribe. Today I'm going to be answering a question from Oh Snap, it's Lauren at Loshiz on Twitter. I have a couple questions from Lauren. So the first one is storyboarding, exclamation mark, namely how to keep composition interesting between panels. Also how to cut out unnecessary panels, like not drawing 4 panels for one concept. So for today's episode, I'm going to do something similar as to what I did the last episode, and show you some examples of my own work to talk about composition and panels and thumbnailing and all of that. So thinking about composition for your comic book pages, there are a lot of different things to consider. I'm going to be looking at showing you pages from The Poet and the Flea again. We looked at some of these pages in the last episode while talking about thumbnailing. So 3 things that I think about when I am deciding the composition of my comic book pages. One is how each panel looks individually. The second is how panels look next to each other on one page. And the third is how pages look next to each other. So I think that these are things that some people, some artists do kind of instinctually, or they've learned how to do it over the years. But these are all things that I really carefully think about and consider while I am doing my thumbnails and deciding the composition for each of my comic book pages. So let's start with how each panel looks individually. So what I mean by that is, let's look at this page of The Poet and the Flea. So this is kind of a unique page because the panels are quite different from a traditional comic book. The panels for The Poet and the Flea are largely inspired by manga. Manga tends to have much more, I would say, fluidity perhaps, or different shapes of comic book pages, when I think Western comics stick more to traditional rectangular or square panels. So I consider like this a panel, this a panel, and this a panel. So individually, this panel at the bottom, while drawing this, I was thinking of the positive space and the negative space. So I talked about this in the previous video. The positive space is the subject of the panel. So this case, it's William Blake. And the negative space is all the space created around him. So I specifically wanted you to see his hands and his feather pen, because he's drawing, and he even says, I draw an angel. And the bubble kind of is both negative and positive space, the dialogue bubble, because it's not really the subject of the illustration, but it's an important part of the storytelling. So this choice to put the dialogue bubble between Blake's face and his hand was a deliberate choice. This is an early page in the graphic novel, so I was still very much experimenting with the style. And so I think that my style has developed over this first volume, and it continues to change in a way, but I also try to make it as that it looks like one volume. It doesn't change too much. But yeah, so there was this deliberate idea of how his hand is here and his arm is continuing here. You don't see his elbow. That's hidden off of the page. But you definitely get this presence. He has a strong presence in this bottom panel. I mean, he's the subject of the panel, but it's really the first time in the comic that you see him this up close. You see him on the second page too, but he's a little farther away. And so and then same with this panel. This is an interesting panel because it is also the page that he's drawing on. So he's drawing his wife, who he calls an angel. So this is a very different sort of panel that I've created, a panel that is also a page within the world of the story. So if you look at each panel individually, they're strong enough to be illustrations on their own separately. But then the second thing to consider is how the panels look next to each other. So this is really important on this page because you get the sense that Kate is far away and Blake is further towards you. You get the sense that they're looking at each other from across the room, and then to have his drawing, which is the subject of their conversation, in the center of the page. So also you can see how this image then and the dialogue bubble draw your eye down and down to this one. So your eye is working across the page this way. So let's look at pages 9 and 10. This is a part of The Poet and the Flea where William is telling his wife Catherine about his childhood, and she is listening to him and comforting him. So you get this image of Blake as a child where he was being beaten by his father, so he's kind of fallen down onto the road or the floor, and Kate is listening here and touches Blake's hand. You see this close-up of Blake at the bottom where you get a real sense of what he's feeling. This is a much more straightforward panel arrangement where it's just rectangles, but some of them are thinner, shorter than others. And so then if we look at it next to page 10, there is a pattern of here's Kate's profile and her hand, and then you can see from this bottom panel on page 10 that she's continuing to touch her husband's hands. So with this, I'd like to address the idea of expressing something through multiple panels, but you're not drawing the same thing over and over again, but something similar in a different way, because these 3 panels express something similar, but it also kind of shows movement in a way. It shows different versions of the same thing, but because this is a silhouette, it emphasizes the dialogue because there's less detail here. It's pushing your eye towards this dialogue here. So this kind of seems like a calm, quiet conversation because the panels are so even and similar shapes to each other, but your eye is still being drawn through the page from page to page. In pages 17 and 18, it takes place with William and Kate in bed together discussing Blake's nightmare, and you're kind of seeing how I'm drawing the same space over and over again, the same bedroom, the same bed, but you're getting different angles. So it's not just a boring conversation where, you're getting the same angle over and over again. You're getting Blake, putting his hand over his eyes, and then Blake putting his hand on his chest, and then also how the dialogue is above him in this panel, but below him in this panel. So you're also getting this pattern between the 2 pages of the dialogue going up, down, down, up. But of course your eye is going kind of like this and then around like that. So the dialogue bubbles are definitely going to help draw the eye. I mean, that's what you're kind of actively reading the words, and then kind of absorbing the images perhaps as a second thought almost. So I guess an audience, when you read a comic, you're going to see the image first, and then you're going to read the dialogue and be aware of the image as you're reading the dialogue. But I think that this is an interesting example because there are a lot of images of Blake and Kate, but they're all different, kind of showing their emotions. They're hiding their emotions in a different way. But you can also see how close they are because they're right next to each other in bed. And, you know, they're having a very intimate conversation, I would say. And then that's also why this panel, this bottom panel on the bottom of page 17, where he's talking about instructing his younger brother who died in composition, you know, teaching him about art. So this panel, which is a practice drawing a figure, you know, maybe Blake was teaching his younger brother Robert how to draw figures. So this is such a stark, less detailed panel than the other panels on these two pages. So this one kind of bursts through a little bit. It kind of highlights it because it's less dark and it's less detail. Let's look at page 21 and 22. This is a very dynamic set of pages. It has a lot of movement and a lot of panic to them. So especially on the top two panels on this page, because of the way that they're kind of overlapping each other and the way they're kind of these jagged edges, that's creating a sense of panic to complement like the scariness of the flea in the first panel and then Blake's panicked face in the second panel. And then you're getting the silhouette of Blake running away, but you're also getting kind of the sense of like evil moving in to catch him, like these tendrils are trying to catch him, and also a sense of the dark, gritty, you know, industrial revolution going on around them. But you have this kind of, because this is not balanced, even panels, you're getting that sense of panic and movement. This, I really love how this top three, it's technically three panels, but it looks like one panel with another panel on top of, layered on top of it. I really love how this one turned out because it's kind of showing what is going through Blake's mind as he's panicking and running away. He's having these visions of this horrible creature through his mind, in his imagination. And then these lines here kind of show the movement and the panic a little bit. And then these three much darker panels, because they're fanned out like this, there's that movement going down. And there's like this sense of running as well. Because on this page, he's running to the left, and this panel on this page, he's running towards the right. You kind of get a sense of confusion that he doesn't know which way he's going. So this is like an interesting way to tackle panic and movement in a scene. I wanted to point out page 40 because this is the only page in the Poet and the Flea Volume 1 that's just a single image on one page, one panel on one page. It's like it's the first time he says, "I am the ghost of a flea." It's the first time you hear that name, Ghost of a Flea. So this is kind of like a showstopper in a way, because it is, you've been only seeing pages with multiple panels on them. So this is kind of making the reader pause and look at this one page as a single page, a single panel, and being like, okay, that's who we're dealing with. We're dealing with this creature. So this is kind of like a pause, like a big reveal and a pause before going on to the next page. Let's talk about page 57 and 58. These are two interesting pages because there's no dialogue on either of these pages, but you're getting a lot of Blake's frustration and his worrying and his thoughts kind of running through his mind. So this is when the flea leaves for the night. I mean, the flea is going to return later, and this is Blake is clearly frustrated. And even though these panels are pretty even, you know, you have these two panels on the top are the same size as these two pages on the bottom, but there's still a lot going on that's drawing the eye through the page. So even though they're even, it's setting a very specific tone of, you know, kind of like a transition from this horrible encounter with the ghost of a flea and Blake coming back to his wife Catherine and making sure she's okay. I really like using silhouettes because you can really capture the character's emotion or what they're going through, the turmoil they're in, with just this figure, this outline. You look at this and you're like, what is going on? He's clearly worried. He's clearly thinking a lot. He's contemplating what he's gotten himself into. And then you have him looking out the window at the moon, and this is almost like a panel within this bigger panel. I also tend to use different textures to enhance what's going on. So like this kind of texture here in the background, they're just shadows, but I think they are also giving you the sense that there's something spinning through Blake's mind. It's kind of giving the mood, the tone of this scene. Let's talk about page 89 and 90. This is another example of rectangular panels that are the same size. And what I did with these two pages was that they actually, even though these three panels are different sizes on each page, but they're actually the same size across the pages. So like these are the same size, this is the same size, that's the same size. So that really helps put these two pages together visually. So this here, the silhouetted illustration here is a flashback of when Kate and Blake first met. So this is kind of the contrast, these two bottom panels of Blake and Kate in the present tense, the present of the story, and then the same two characters but a flashback. So it really gives that contrast. And then again with these two images, you have both of their silhouettes and they're looking away from each other. So it kind of gives, like, you know, perhaps they're not on the same page, or they're kind of looking away from each other, which is further emphasized by this panel because you can see that Blake's back is to Kate. But they're still talking to each other, but you get the sense that there's, you know, something not quite right. You get the sense that they're discussing a difficult topic. Let's talk about page 93. This is an interesting page because it's very dialogue and word heavy, which is unusual for me. But I use the dialogue as a way to draw the eye. So you're reading this and then you're going back and forth and then to the bottom. So that's drawing the eye through the page, but you're also highlighting this dialogue, that this is all happening all at once. It's like a very intimate moment between these two characters, Blake and his future wife. And so it's kind of like giving it a sense of tension in a way, because it's almost like holding your breath because there aren't more images of them. There's just the silhouettes of them. And then you're like waiting for them, what's going to happen, what they're talking about. So this is a unique page, I think, out of the other pages in The Poet and the Flea. And it was an experiment, and I really like how this one turned out. So I guess there's no real straightforward way to answer Lauren's question about keeping the composition interesting between panels, other than to show you the examples that I did. I just wanted to give you insight into my thought process when I am thumbnailing pages, because I work out all of the composition when I'm thumbnailing, and then I add other elements to work out the composition when I am drawing the finished page, but the composition begins in the thumbnailing stage. So I hope it will be helpful for all of you to think about how each panel looks individually, how panels look next to each other on one page, and how pages look next to each other. I think that'll really help you figure out composition better. And of course, it's a lot of trial and error. As I've said in previous videos, you really just have to experiment and figure out what works for you, your personal taste, what you think the composition should look like, and practice. The more pages you draw, the more you're going to have a better sense of how pacing is going to be, how the composition is going to be, how the figures are going to fit on each page. And there's nothing wrong with drawing the same content more than once. It's just you might not want to do it the same way each time. You might want to draw it a different way or a different angle or different, close up or far away, because that's a very cinematic part of comic book making, is that maybe you have like a flower that's like, you have the seedling and then it grows and then it flowers and then it shrivels. So that's very kind of like animation and cinematic, but sometimes you need that in a graphic novel to have that evolution of one image to give your reader a sense of growth or a sense of time passing, but you don't want to just repeat the same exact image over and over again, because that is a little bit boring, unless there's a really good reason to do that. I mean, maybe it's part of the plot. So just experiment. I'd be happy to talk about composition more. I'd be happy to show you more examples. I hope that my examples will give you ideas for your own comic book pages. So the next episode, we're going to be answering more of Lauren's questions, so look forward to that. And if you like what I'm doing here, if you like my videos, if you find them useful, please subscribe. It's free, it's easy, it's just one click away, and you're going to be supporting my channel. If you have any questions for me, don't hesitate to ask. I am so thrilled to answer all of your questions. So please reply below with your question, or you can always tweet me your question at GEGallas, which is GEGALLAS. So I look forward to receiving those questions and answering them in a future episode. That's all for now. See you next time.